There are 4 rules for entering a grain bin, and I am going to read them to you the way they are printed on the laminated card that hangs by the ladder of every bin in this country. 1. Shut off and lock out all powered equipment before entry, and keep the key on your person. 2. Test the atmosphere and ventilate before you go in. 3. Wear a body harness with a lifeline, anchored above. 4. Have 2 trained observers outside, in contact, at all times. 4 rules. 4. That is the entire list, and it exists because grain is not a solid, it is not a liquid, and it does not care about you at all. My name is Nathan, and here is what I want you to hold in your head for the next hour. On a Tuesday in October, on a family farm in a county named after the family that owns it, all 4 of those rules were broken for one boy in about 11 seconds. Not over a season, not through drift or laziness or a bad year. In 11 seconds, by a grown man who knew every one of them because he had signed a piece of paper 11 months earlier saying he had been trained on all 4. The boy's father spent 19 years teaching other men how to go into holes like that and come back out. He was 8,000 feet up a mountain, teaching exactly that, when the phone rang. I want you to count the rules as they break. The corn came in wet that year, and that is where this story actually starts. 3 weeks before anybody was hurt. Everybody in Ruggles County knew it. You could hear it in how people said the word moisture at the co-op counter, the way people in other places say the word biopsy. The harvest had run through 2 straight weeks of rain, and grain that goes into a bin above about 15.5% moisture does something specific and predictable. It respires, it heats, it sweats, and the top of the pile welds itself into a crust. Underneath that crust, the corn keeps flowing like sand. Above it, it looks like a floor. Grain that has crusted is worth less. Grain that has spoiled is worth nothing. And a farm that has to call a professional bin cleaning outfit to break up a crust properly, with an auger lockout, an atmosphere test, a harness, a tripod, a winch, and 2 men on the outside, pays somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 for the privilege, and waits 9 days for a crew. Gannon Ruggles did not pay $2,000 for anything, and he did not wait 9 days for anything, and everybody in Little Harrow could have told you both of those things for free. He ran the family's operation, 1,100 acres north of town, plus the bins, plus a share of the elevator with his name on the side of it in letters 4 feet tall. Ruggles Elevator and Grain Co. Est, 1949, painted over 3 times, the last time badly, so that the old lettering ghosted through underneath in the afternoon light. He was 46 years old, he had never worked anywhere else, and he had a specific talent that his family mistook for competence. He could make a thing that was about to cost money into a thing that was about to cost somebody else's time. Lawson Radford spent his summers and his weekends on that farm because that was the arrangement. His mother, Sloan, had grown up on it. She was a Ruggles before she was a Radford, and she had married a soldier at 23 against her father's advice, and had spent the 20 years since then quietly proving to a family that never asked that she had not made a mistake. She worked at the county extension office. She kept the books for the elevator on Saturdays. She was, and this matters, not a cruel woman. She was a woman who had been raised to believe that a Ruggles absorbs a thing rather than makes a scene about it, and that belief was about to cost her more than she could imagine. Her husband was gone a lot, and that was the other half of the arrangement. Master Sergeant Emerson Radford, M., to everybody who had ever spent a night in a tent with him, had been in 19 years. He had come up in an engineer battalion and then found the thing he was actually built for, which was not blowing things up, but getting people out from under them. Rubble, collapsed trenches, elevator shafts, silos, culverts, mines, anywhere a person could get into a space that a person could not get out of. For the last 6 years he had been an instructor. He ran a technical rescue cadre, high-angle, confined space, structural collapse, and about half of every year he spent at a training site in the mountains teaching sergeants from a dozen units how to build an anchor that would not fail, how to test an atmosphere that would not sustain a life, how to lower a man into a hole, and more importantly, how to not become the second body in it. He was good at it in a way that made him boring at parties. He did not tell war stories. He told you, with real enthusiasm and at length, why your extension ladder was set at the wrong angle. And every summer for 4 years his son had gone out to the Ruggles place to work. And every summer Em had said the same thing to him on the phone, in the same flat voice. And the boy had learned to say it along with him like a joke between them. Never go in the bin. Never go in the bin. Never go in the bin. Lawson was 13 the fall this happened, and he had that particular 13-year-old gift of being enormously capable at everything except saying no to an adult. He was tall for his age and skinny in the way that makes a grandparent hand you a second plate. He was quiet like his father and stubborn like his mother. He could back a wagon into a shed better than his uncle could. He had, in a shoebox under his bed, 4 years of pay in 20s. Gannon paid cash, always cash, and never quite the amount he had promised. And a spiral notebook where he wrote down the hours, because his dad had told him once that a man who does not write down his own hours is agreeing to whatever number he gets handed. That notebook is going to matter enormously in about 4 chapters. I want you to remember it exists. The last thing you need to know before the Tuesday is the shape of the county. Ruggles County has 9,000 people in it. The sheriff's name is Caldwell. He has been the sheriff for 22 years, and he will be the sheriff until he decides not to be. And on Thursday nights he plays cards at the back of the Elks with 4 other men, and one of those men is Gannon Ruggles, and they have been doing it since before either of them had gray in his hair. That is not a conspiracy. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and cheap to make this a story about a corrupt sheriff, and it is not that. It is worse than that, and more common. It is a story about a place where everybody has known everybody for 50 years, and where the natural, unforced, unspoken instinct when something bad happens is not to cover it up, exactly, but to decide very quickly what kind of thing it was, and to agree, and to move on. On the 12th of October, Gannon Ruggles decided that bin 4 had a crust on it, and that his nephew was standing right there. It was 2:40 in the afternoon. The bin was a 48-foot corrugated steel butler with a stirrator that had not worked since 2019, holding somewhere around 14,000 bushels of number 2 yellow corn at 17.5% moisture, which is bad. The unload auger at the bottom had been running about 20 minutes, and the flow had stopped, which meant the corn had bridged. A hollow had opened under the crust, and the surface above it was now a shelf of welded grain over an empty space, like the ice on a pond in March. That is the single most dangerous condition in agriculture. There is a specific phrase for it: bridged grain. Every laminated card in the country has it in bold. Gannon climbed the outside ladder, opened the roof hatch, looked in, and saw a floor. "Lawson," he called down, "come up here a second." What happened next is on record, in a state investigator's report, in a form of English so flat it is almost violent, and I have read it more times than is good for me. The boy climbed the ladder. His uncle handed him a 19-foot length of 2-inch PVC pipe and told him to go down and poke the crust loose so the corn would run. He told him to stay near the wall. He told him it would take 2 minutes. He did not shut off the auger. Rule 1. He did not test the air in a bin full of corn that had been respiring for 3 weeks, which is to say, a bin quietly filling itself with carbon dioxide. Rule 2. There was no harness on the property. Rule 3. And there were no observers, because Gannon went back down the ladder and around to the truck to take a phone call about a bearing. Rule 4. 11 seconds, from the boy's boot on the crust to the crust letting go. He went in to his knees, and then, because flowing grain is not sand and does not stop, to his hips, and then to his chest, and then it stopped, which is the cruelest part, because a boy who is chest-deep in corn is still talking. He is still calm. He is still saying, in a perfectly reasonable voice, that he is stuck. Flowing grain exerts about 400 pounds of pull at that depth. A grown man cannot pull himself out. A grown man cannot be pulled out. You will separate his shoulder before you move him an inch. And the whole time, every movement he makes to free himself vibrates the grain and lets it settle tighter around his ribs, so that breathing out becomes easier than breathing in, and then breathing in becomes work, and then it becomes the only work there is. Gannon came back around the truck 7 minutes later. What he did in the next 4 minutes is the reason there is a story at all, and I want to be exact about it, because it is not what you would guess. He did not panic. He did not run. He did not call 911. He climbed up, looked in, saw his nephew chest deep and talking, and made a decision that made complete sense inside his own head. He decided he could fix it. He went down the ladder, drove the skid steer around, and started shoveling at the outside of the bin's unload gate, trying to draw the level down, which pulls the boy down. Every bushel that leaves the bottom of a bin pulls everything above it down with it. He was, with real effort and real sweat, actively burying his nephew. For 4 minutes, because he had never been trained on a single thing he had signed a piece of paper saying he had been trained on. It was a neighbor's kid, 16 years old, driving a grain cart past the end of the drive, who saw a man alone at a bin moving fast and wrong and stopped. That kid called it in at 3:04 p.m. Little Harrow's volunteer fire department has 19 members, 2 engines, 1 tanker, and 1 rescue truck. That is mostly a converted bread van, and it is. And I say this with the full weight of somebody who has read the timeline, one of the reasons Lawson Radford is alive. Captain Jensen Vanterpool got there in 6 minutes. He is a heating and cooling contractor 5 days a week. 2 years earlier, he had driven 90 miles to a 2-day grain entrapment class put on by a farm bureau, because a man in the next county over had died in a bin and it had bothered him. 19 volunteers, and 4 of them had gone with him, and they had come home with a set of aluminum coffer panels, curved sheets you drive down into the grain around a trapped person to make a wall, so you can dig the grain out from around them without the pile refilling the hole. Those panels had sat in the back of the bread van for 2 years, and everybody had made jokes about them. Vanterpool did 4 things in the first 90 seconds, and every one of them was right. He shut off and locked out the auger. He put a man on the outside of the bin with a radio and another one on the hatch. He sent 2 men up with the coffer panels and a rope, and this is the part that M. Radford would later say out loud in a room full of people, twice, so nobody would miss it. He did not send a man in without a harness, even though there was a 13-year-old boy in there and every instinct in a human body says go. That is the whole discipline, right there. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of grain bin fatalities in this country are would-be rescuers. The second body. They got the panels around him at 3:19. They dug with their hands and with cut-down plastic scoops, because a shovel near a trapped person breaks ribs, and it took them until 3:41 to get him free enough to move, and by then he had been in the grain for 41 minutes, and his lips were the color of a bruise. He was conscious. He asked Vanterpool, twice, whether he was going to be in trouble. The medical part is short. 3 fractured ribs from the pressure, a collapsed lung on the right, compartment issues in both legs from the crush, which is the thing that nearly killed him at the hospital and not at the bin, because when you decompress a crushed limb, everything that has been sitting in the muscle floods the bloodstream at once. He spent 6 days in the pediatric ICU in the city, 2 of them on a ventilator, and his kidneys came within a whisker of failing. The phone call reached his father 4 hours after the boy came out of the bin. Not 4 minutes. 4 hours. Nobody called him. Sloan called her mother, and her mother called the church, and the church called half the county, and it did not occur to a single person in that family to call the boy's father until a nurse asked for the second parent's name and number for the consent form. M. Radford was at 8,200 feet on a rock face with a class of 11 sergeants, running a pickoff from a fixed line, when his first sergeant drove the utility truck to the base of the route and stood there with his hand up. He came down the rope in about 40 seconds, which the 11 sergeants talked about for a year. He drove 9 hours that night and got to the hospital at 4:40 in the morning, still in the pants he had been climbing in, and he sat in a plastic chair and looked at a boy with a chest tube and a face he did not entirely recognize because of the petechiae, the pinpoint bleeding across the eyes and forehead that you get from that kind of pressure. Sloan was asleep in the other chair. She woke up and saw him and started to cry, and the first thing she said to him was, "Please don't make this a thing. I want to be fair to her, because this story is going to be hard on her and she has a case to make." She had been awake for 19 hours. She had watched her son come out of a bin. She was terrified, and the way that terror expressed itself, in a woman raised in that family, was as a desperate wish for everything to go back to normal. But it is still the sentence she said, and her husband heard it, and it went into him like a splinter and stayed there. The second thing that went in was in the hallway, at 11 the next morning, when Gannon Ruggles arrived with a gas station bouquet and a story he had clearly told a few times already. He was up there messing around, Gannon said, to the corridor generally. I told him to stay off the pile. Kid's got to earn his keep, but he's got to listen too. And M said nothing at all. He looked at his brother-in-law for about 4 seconds, and he nodded, and he went back into the room. Everyone present read that as shock. One of them, later, described it in a deposition as, "He took it well." Here is what was actually happening behind that face, and it is the reason I picked this story. Emerson Radford was doing what he had trained 1,100 men to do at the top of a rope. He was running the accident backwards. Not emotionally, procedurally. What was the last thing that had to be true for this outcome to be possible? And the thing before that? And the thing before that? Because in his trade there is a doctrine, and it is not a soft one. It says that an accident is never one thing. It is a chain, and every link in it is a decision that a person made, usually a long time before the day. Find the links, and you do not have an accident anymore. You have a series of choices with names attached to them. He stood in a hospital corridor with a paper cup of coffee, and he started at the end and worked backwards. And by the time the coffee was cold, he had 6 links, and 4 of them had the same name on them, and one of them, the one he could not stop looking at, had his wife's family's name on the side of a building. The sheriff came to the hospital that afternoon, and that visit is the hinge of this whole story. Sheriff Caldwell is 61. He is not a bad man, and he is not on anybody's payroll. And if you had asked him that day whether he was doing his job, he would have said yes with a completely clear conscience. He came in, shook M's hand, said the right things about the boy. Then he said this, "Now, I've talked to Gannon. He's tore up about it. What we've got here is a farm accident, and I hate 'em. I've worked a dozen of 'em. Boy went where he shouldn't have gone. He was told to go in," M said. "That's not what Gannon says. That's what my son says." The sheriff did a thing with his mouth. "Well," he said, "he's 13, and he's had a hell of a time, and he's on morphine." And there it was. Not a cover-up, a category. In about 11 words, an event had been sorted into a bin marked farm accident, and everything that came afterward would be measured against that label instead of against the facts. M asked one question. He asked it flatly, the way he asks a student what the working load limit of a piece of webbing is. "Sheriff, is the farm covered by federal workplace safety rules?" Caldwell almost laughed. "It's a family farm, son. That's an exemption for farms with 10 or fewer employees and no temporary labor camp," M said. "How many did the elevator run this fall?" The sheriff looked at him for a long moment, and something moved behind his face, and what he said was, "You want to be careful making that kind of noise around here. I want to tell you why the man in that hallway was so dangerous. Because from the outside, he did not look dangerous at all. He looked like a tired dad in climbing pants." Emerson Radford's actual profession, stripped of the uniform, is this. He is a person who is professionally certain about the physical world. He does not have opinions about whether an anchor will hold. He knows, because there is a number, and the number is printed on the webbing, and there is a test, and he has done the test. 19 years of that does something to a man. It makes him almost useless at arguing about feelings, and almost unbeatable at arguing about facts. And the family he had married into had spent 20 years mistaking the first thing for the whole man. They thought he was a soldier who was good with ropes. What he was a man who wrote everything down. He had a habit, drilled into him by a chief warrant officer in his 2nd year, that he had never broken. After any incident, before anything else, before you talk to anybody, you write the timeline. Times, names, exact words, in order, with a line under the last entry so nothing can be added. He started his in the hospital parking garage at 1:15 p.m. on the 2nd day, on the back of a discharge instruction sheet, and by the time this was over, that timeline was 14 pages long, and every page was signed and dated at the bottom in his own hand. And that is the first of the 4 boring, unglamorous, deeply ordinary things that ended the Ruggles family's control of Ruggles County. The second one was the notebook under a 13-year-old's bed. Lawson came home on the 6th day with a chest that hurt when he laughed and instructions not to lift anything over 10 pounds for a month. The house was very careful for about 4 days. Sloane cooked things nobody wanted. Her mother came by with a casserole and the specific brand of sympathy that is really an instruction, and said, in the kitchen, with the boy 20 feet away, The main thing is, we don't let this tear the family apart. On the 5th day, Gannon Ruggles came to the house. He came in the front door without knocking, the way he had for 20 years, and he put a white envelope on the kitchen table, and he said it was for the medical, and there were $4,100 bills in it. That's $4,000, he said. And there's more where that came from. We take care of our own. $4,000. The bin cleaning company would have charged between $2,000 and $4,000 to do the job right. M did not touch the envelope. He asked his brother-in-law one question, and he asked it in the same tone you would use to ask a man to pass the salt. Gannon, who signed the grain handling training certification for the elevator this year. The room went quiet in a specific way. Because here is the thing about a commercial grain elevator. As opposed to a family farm, it is not exempt from anything. A facility that takes in grain from other producers, that employs seasonal help, that operates a leg and a dryer and bins over a certain capacity, sits squarely under federal standards written in 1987 after a decade in which too many people died in exactly the way Lawson had almost died. Those standards require training. They require the training to be documented. They require the documentation to be signed. And the elevator's certifications for the last 4 years had been signed by Gannon Ruggles, as the designated competent person, on forms that his sister, the bookkeeper, on Saturdays, had filed. Sloane Radford, standing at her own kitchen counter, understood the question before her brother did. "Get out," she said. Gannon looked at her. "Sloaney, take your envelope and get out of my house." It was the first true thing anyone in that family had said in 9 days, and I want to give her credit for it. Because she paid for it. Her mother stopped speaking to her for 4 months. Her father, Weatherby Ruggles, who is 81 years old and has the sort of authority in that county that does not require him to raise his voice, called her that night and told her that she was tired and not thinking straight and that she should come by the elevator in the morning and they would sort it out as a family. She did not go. What she did instead, and this is the second boring thing that ended it, was walk into her son's room and ask him for the notebook. Because Sloane Ruggles Radford was the elevator's bookkeeper on Saturdays, and she knew exactly what was in the payroll file, and she knew exactly what was not. Lawson had 4 years of it. Dates, start times, end times, what he did, and what he got paid, written in pencil in a spiral notebook, because his father had told him once that a man who does not write down his own hours is agreeing to whatever number he gets handed. 406 days of work over 4 seasons. 2,911 hours. 0 of it in the payroll file. No W-2, no 1099, no time card, no minor work permit, no hazardous occupation exemption, nothing. Because Gannon paid cash. Always cash. Because cash is easier. And because a farm kid working for family is a thing that has always happened and nobody thinks twice about. And here is the trap that Gannon Ruggles had built for himself over 4 years, brick by brick, without ever once noticing he was doing it. If Lawson was not an employee, if he was just a nephew helping out, then the elevator's $4,000 was not a settlement, and there was no workplace incident, and Gannon was just an uncle whose nephew got hurt on his farm. But if Lawson was not an employee, then Gannon had put an unpaid, undocumented, untrained miner into a bridged grain bin, which is a federal hazardous occupation order violation, and there is no exemption in the world for that. And if Lawson was an employee, which 2,911 hours in a child's handwriting rather suggested, then the elevator had been running undocumented minor labor for 4 years, and every one of those training certifications that Gannon had signed was a false statement on a required record. Both doors led to the same room. Emerson Radford had spent 19 years teaching men how to see that a space has only one exit before they enter it, and he had just watched a man walk into one on his own. He did not go to the sheriff. I want to be clear about that, because it is the smartest thing he did, and it is the thing people always get wrong. The sheriff had already told him what category this was going in. Going back to Caldwell would have been going to the one man in the county whose job it was to make this small. He went sideways. The state's grain handling investigator is a woman named Mathis Sundquist, who covers 11 counties out of a regional office 140 miles away, drives a state car with a bad heater, and had, at that point, been trying to get a look inside Ruggles' elevator for 2 years. Every complaint she had ever received about that facility had been anonymous, and an anonymous complaint gets you a letter. And a letter gets you a phone call from Weatherby Ruggles to a state senator, and the letter goes away. What she had never had was a signed, first-person, dated complaint from an identifiable person with standing. M. Radford drove 140 miles on a Thursday and gave her one. 14 pages of timeline, signed and dated. 4 years of hours in a child's pencil. Photographs of a bin with no lockout box, no harness anchor, no atmosphere monitor, and no rescue equipment on the property. The names of 19 volunteer firefighters who had been inside that bin and would say what they saw, and the 4 training certifications, signed by the man who had sent his son into the corn, which Sloan had photocopied on a Saturday. Sundquist read for 40 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "Do you understand what happens to you in that county if I open this?" "Yes, ma'am." "No," she said. "You understand what happens to you. You don't understand what happens to your wife. She grew up there. Her name is on the building. When this is over, that county is going to treat her like she did it." And M. Radford said the sentence that, when Sloan heard it repeated back to her 2 months later in a deposition, made her put her head down on the table. He said, "She's the one who took the photocopies." The retaliation started 9 days later, and it was not subtle, because it did not need to be. Sloan's hours at the extension office were cut from 32 to 12. The reason given was budget. The county commissioner who approved the budget has hunted the Ruggles ground every November for 30 years. The Radfords' homeowners policy was non-renewed. Their agent, who had been at their wedding, could not look Sloan in the eye at the post office. A man M had never met stood at the end of his driveway at dusk for about 10 minutes on a Tuesday, and then got in his truck and left. And on the 3rd of November, Sheriff Caldwell drove out to the house and sat in the kitchen and delivered what he clearly believed was a favor. "There's talk," he said, "that the boy's been having some trouble, emotional, since the accident. Trouble. Kid says a thing to a counselor at school. It gets written down, and next thing, there's people from the state looking at the home." Caldwell turned his hat over in his hands. "M, I'm telling you this as a friend of the family. You've been gone a lot. There's people saying that's a factor. I don't say it, but it's out there." Then he said the thing that he will regret for the rest of his life, because it was recorded. Nobody wants to see a good family torn up over one bad afternoon. Gannon's willing to make this right. But he can't make it right if it's already a federal matter. You understand what I'm telling you? Once you file, everybody's hands are tied, including mine. Emerson Radford's phone had been sitting face down on the kitchen table for the entire conversation, and it had been recording since the sheriff's car turned into the drive. He was not clever about it. He had not planned it. He had simply been doing, in a kitchen, exactly what he does at the top of a rope, writing down what happens as it happens, because he had learned in his second year that memory is the least reliable piece of equipment on any site. The county is one-party consent. That recording was legal, and the sentence in it, "He can't make it right if it's already a federal matter," is the sentence that turned a workplace safety investigation into something with a great deal more weight behind it. Emerson Radford went back to work in the middle of November, because his leave ran out, and because the thing he needed next could not be got in Ruggles County anyway. He needed to know one number. Everything in his trade comes down to a number. Working load limit, angle of the anchor, parts per million. And there was one number in this whole affair that nobody had asked for, and that he could not stop thinking about at 2 in the morning, which was, how long had that bin been bridged before the 12th of October? Because if bin 4 had bridged that afternoon, then his son's uncle was a fool who made a catastrophic decision in 1 bad minute. But if bin 4 had been bridged for days, if the crust had been forming for 2 weeks in wet corn, if the flow had been stopping and starting, if a grown man had been standing at the bottom of that bin watching the auger run dry over and over, then it was not a bad minute. It was a plan, a cheap plan, made in advance, to solve a $4,000 problem with a 13-year-old. You cannot ask a bin what it did. But a modern elevator is full of machines that keep records without being asked, and this is the part of the story I find genuinely beautiful. The unload auger at Ruggles Elevator ran off a 3-phase motor on a soft starter, and the soft starter, a $2,000 box that Weatherby Ruggles had bought in 2016 to stop burning up motors, logs every start, every stop, every runtime, and every overload trip, with a timestamp, and holds about 2 years of it. Nobody had ever read it. It is a maintenance device. It exists so a technician can tell you why a motor keeps tripping. M. Radford knew it was there because he had helped his father-in-law's electrician pull wire to it on a leave weekend in 2016, and had stood there in the dust reading the manual because that is the kind of man he is. He also knew that the co-op's grain dryer, sitting 50 yards away, had a moisture and temperature controller that logged every batch, date, bushels, incoming moisture, outgoing moisture, that the elevator's scale system printed a numbered load ticket for every truck that crossed it, and that the power company, for a 3-phase commercial account, holds 15-minute interval demand data, because that is how they bill. 4 machines, 4 sets of records, none of them owned by anyone who cared about this case, and none of them capable of having an opinion about the Ruggles family. Mathis Sundquist subpoenaed all 4 in the first week of December. Here is what they said, laid side by side, and I want to walk you through it the way she walked a room through it, because it is the closest thing to a confession that a pile of paper can be. The dryer log showed that between the 24th of September and the 8th of October, Bin 4 had been filled with 11 separate batches of corn at incoming moistures between 17.1 and 18.9%. Not one batch of it had been run through the dryer. It had gone in wet, all of it, because drying costs propane and propane costs money. The load tickets showed that 1/3 of those bushels had come from 2 neighbors' farms, which is what makes a family farm a commercial facility, and takes the exemption away entirely. And the soft starter told the story of the last 13 days of that bin's life in a way nobody could argue with. Starting on the 29th of September, the unload auger began doing something it had never done in the 2 years of stored data, running for 4 to 9 minutes and then stopping, over and over, with no load. 9 times on the 29th, 14 times on the 2nd of October, 22 times on the 6th. On the 11th, the day before, the auger started and stopped 31 times in 90 minutes and drew an overload trip twice, 31 times. A man stood at the bottom of that bin the day before, and 31 times he turned on an auger that pulled nothing, and 31 times he understood exactly what that meant, because there is only one thing it can mean. And the power company's interval data confirmed every one of those runs to the quarter hour, independently, from 110 miles away. Bin 4 had been bridged for at least 13 days. On the afternoon of the 12th of October, Gannon Ruggles did not make a mistake. He had a known problem that had a known price, and he had been staring at it for 13 days. And when his nephew walked past the shed carrying a 5-gallon bucket, he solved it for free. There is one more thing in that data, and Mathis Sundquist found it, and it is the thing that took this out of the world of fines. At 2:58 p.m. on the 12th of October, while Lawson Radford was chest deep and talking, the unload auger ran for 4 minutes and 11 seconds under load. Under load. Moving grain. Out of the bottom of the bin his nephew was standing in. Gannon had told the sheriff, and later told an investigator under oath, that he had shut everything off the moment he saw the boy was stuck and had gone for help. The machine said otherwise, to the second. I have skipped over something, and I want to go back for it, because it is the part where the Army walks into a county in Kansas without ever sending a single person there. When Emerson Radford went back to work in November, he did what a soldier is required to do, and what most people in his position dread. He told his commander, Colonel Reeves is not a character out of a movie. He did not slam a hand on a desk, or grant anybody 96 hours and 8 of his best men. What he did was listen for 20 minutes, ask 3 questions, and then pick up a phone and get a legal assistance attorney on the line, and the sentence he said into that phone is the whole of it. I've got a senior instructor with a state matter and a possible retaliation issue. I want him talking to you before he talks to anybody else. That is not dramatic. It is better than dramatic, because what it meant, in practice, was that from the 2nd week of November onward, every letter that left Emerson Radford's hand had been read first by a lawyer whose entire job is soldiers, and who had no relationship whatsoever with anybody in Ruggles County. It also meant something else, and Weatherby Ruggles found this out the hard way in January. The old man did what he had always done, which was call a state senator he had given money to for 26 years. The senator's office made a call to the department. And the department, this time, said a sentence that had never been said about that facility before. That the complaint was not anonymous, that the complainant was an active duty service member represented by counsel, and that there was a recording. I have thought a lot about why that combination worked when 2 years of anonymous complaints had not, and I do not think it is because anybody was afraid of the army. I think it is because an anonymous complaint can be made to be about nothing, and a named one has a person standing behind it, and the moment a person is standing there, the question stops being whether to look, and starts being what happens to you if you did not. Mathis Sundquist walked into Ruggles Elevator and Grain on the 9th of January with 2 colleagues and a warrant at 7:40 in the morning in weather that was 11 degrees. Gannon met her in the office with a lawyer from the city, which was itself an answer to a question nobody had asked yet. The inspection took 9 hours, and the lawyer stopped it twice, and it did not matter, because Sundquist was not there to interview anybody. She was there for 4 things, and she had known exactly what those 4 things were since a Thursday in November, when a man in climbing pants had put a photograph of an empty wall in front of her. She photographed the wall where a lockout station should have been, and was not, and had never been, because there were no anchor holes in the block behind it. She photographed the bin 4 hatch, and the absence of any anchor point above it rated for a fall arrest system. She pulled the soft starters data, and the dryers, and the scale tickets, on site, in front of the lawyer, with the serial numbers photographed against a ruler. And then she asked one question, which she had prepared, and which was the only question she asked all day. Mr. Ruggles, in the 4 years you signed as the facility's designated competent person, how many training sessions did you conduct? The lawyer put a hand on his client's arm. Gannon Ruggles, who had answered every hard question of his adult life by talking through it, said, "It's a family operation. Everybody knows the bins." Sundquist wrote that down word for word, and it appears twice in the citation narrative. And it is, in the end, the sentence that cost his family the elevator. Because it is not a denial. It is an admission dressed as a defense. He had signed 4 years of federal training records for training he had never held, and he did not think that was a strange thing to say out loud in front of a state investigator and his own attorney. The lawyer's strategy, once the data came back in February, was the only one available, and it is worth understanding because it is where the notebook did its work. The defense was, the boy was not an employee. He was a nephew, helping out, on a family farm, and family farms are exempt, and a relative doing chores is not covered labor, and therefore none of the standards applied to him at all. It is a decent argument. It has worked in this country many, many times. It survived 9 days. It died when the state entered into the record 2,911 hours of documented work across 4 seasons, in the boy's own handwriting, contemporaneous, dated, matched line by line against the elevator's own scale tickets, because Lawson had written down what he did, and what he did on 41 of those days was help run a scale that had a printed ticket with a timestamp on it. A nephew helping out does not appear on a commercial scale ticket 41 times, and the moment he was an employee, every exemption in the argument fell over at once, and the thing his uncle had done became not a family tragedy, but a workplace, and everything that had been a private matter for a county became a matter of public record. It cost $4,000 to have that bin cleaned properly. I keep coming back to that number. Everything that followed, the license, the sale, the 11 months, the letter of concern, an 82-year-old man on a porch looking at somebody else's sign, all of it was purchased for $4,000 that a man did not want to spend. The rest of it moved the way these things move, which is slowly and then all at once. The federal citations came first, in February, because they are the fastest instrument. 11 serious violations and 2 willful ones. And a willful citation is a specific legal finding, not that you failed to know, but that you knew and chose. The proposed penalties came to $219,000, which the elevator could absorb. What it could not absorb was the second consequence, and this is the one M had seen coming from the hospital corridor. A commercial grain facility does not run on cash. It runs on a bonded warehouse license, which the state grants and can suspend, and on hedging lines from a lender, and on an insurance policy. And every one of those 3 things has language in it about false statements on required records. Weatherby Ruggles had been signing an annual attestation to the state for 31 years affirming that his facility's grain handling training records were true and complete. His son had been forging them. The bonded license went into suspension in March, pending review. That meant the elevator could not legally take in another producer's grain. In an 1,100-acre county in March, that is not an inconvenience. That is a business that has stopped existing. The neighbors did not need to be told twice. 2 of them had corn in bin 4 and had learned, from a state document, that it had sat wet for 3 weeks and been managed by a man who solved crusts with a child. The criminal side took longer, and it did not come from the state. It came from a 12-second passage in a recording made on a kitchen table in November, in which a sitting county sheriff explained to a father that a man could not make this right if it's already a federal matter, in the same conversation in which he raised the possibility of the state looking at that father's home. That went to the state attorney general's public integrity unit, along with 14 pages of timeline, in April. Sheriff Caldwell was not indicted. I want to be honest about that, because a story is supposed to end with handcuffs, and this one does not. Quite. What happened to him is in some ways worse. The AG's office declined to charge and issued a public letter of concern, which is a document that says, in careful language, that a man's conduct was improper but not provably criminal, and that document is now the first thing that comes up when you search his name. He did not file for re-election in the fall, after 22 years, and he told the paper it was his knees. Gannon Ruggles was charged in state court with 3 counts: endangering the welfare of a child, tampering with a public record, and 1 count of falsifying business records. He pleaded to 2 of them in the following January. He served 11 months, and here is the part I did not expect when I started reading this file, and the part that says the most about what Emerson Radford actually is. At the sentencing, the state asked for the maximum. The victim's family is invited to speak. Sloan spoke for 4 minutes, and it was, by every account, devastating. M. Radford spoke for less than 1, and he did not ask for more time. He asked for 1 condition, and the judge granted it, and it appears in the sentencing order. He asked that, as a condition of release, Gannon Ruggles complete and pass a certified grain entrapment rescue course, the 2-day one, the one Jensen Vanterpool had driven 90 miles for, and that he do it in a class of volunteers. People in the courtroom thought it was mercy. It was not mercy. It was the most precise thing anybody did in the entire affair, and you have to know the trade to see it. Because the way that course starts, every single time, in every state, is that they put you in a bin, in a harness, on a lifeline, with 2 observers on the outside and the auger locked out, and they let the grain come up around you until you cannot get yourself out, and they leave you there long enough to learn what that is. They do it so that you will never, ever, put anyone else in it. Gannon Ruggles went into a grain bin, on a rope, in front of 19 volunteer firefighters from 3 counties who all knew exactly who he was and exactly what he had done, and he learned the lesson in the only language he had ever been able to hear. Captain Vanterpool, who was one of the instructors that weekend, was asked afterward how it went. He said, "He cried at about the sternum. They all do. The elevator sold in September to a co-op out of the next state for less than the land under it was worth." Weatherby Ruggles did not go to the closing. He is 82 now. He sits on the porch of a house he built in 1971 with a view of a building that has somebody else's name on it, and the ghost of the old lettering still comes through in the afternoon, which I think about more than I should. I want to be careful about him, because it would be easy to make him a villain, and I do not think he was one. He was a man who had built something over 50 years, and had never once, in all that time, checked whether his own son was telling him the truth about the parts of it that were boring. He signed an attestation every year for 31 years, and he believed every word of it, and the not checking is the whole of his guilt, and it was enough to end him. That is worth sitting with. He did not do anything. He just never looked. Sloan Radford paid the bill that Mathis Sundquist had warned her about, and she paid it in full. Her mother did not speak to her for 4 months, and then spoke to her again, and it has never been the same, and it is not going to be. She lost the extension job in the spring, formally, on a budget line. At the grocery store in Little Harrow, there was a period of about 6 months where conversations stopped when she came down an aisle. She got a job in the city, 41 minutes each way, doing books for a construction outfit, and she is better paid than she has ever been. And she told her husband once, in the car, that the worst part was not the silence. The worst part was that when she was alone, she could still hear her own voice in a hospital room saying, "Please don't make this a thing," and she could not make it stop. He told her the truth, which is that everybody in a bad situation says one sentence they would give a year of their life to take back, and that the difference between people is not whether they say it, it is what they do in the 9 days afterward. She took the photocopies on day 9. Lawson Radford is 15 now. His lungs are fine. He runs cross-country, badly and happily. There is a rope of scar on his right side from the chest tube that he is proud of in the way boys are proud of scars. And there are 2 things about him that are not fine, and his father has been very honest with him about both. He does not like enclosed spaces, and that is probably permanent. He sat in the back of a car with 2 other kids for a 2-hour drive to a meet and had to ask them to stop, and he was humiliated, and his father drove up and got him and did not make a single joke about it for the entire drive home. And for about a year he could not stop apologizing. To his mother, to the nurses, to Captain Vanterpool at the fire department barbecue, where he stood in front of a man twice his size and said he was sorry for the trouble, and Vanterpool crouched down to his eye level and told him the only thing that has ever fully worked. He said, "Son, you didn't cause a rescue, you survived one. Those are different jobs and you did yours. The notebook is in a fireproof box in a closet in a different county now, along with 14 pages of timeline and a memory card with a 12-second passage on it." Lawson asked for it back once, about a year later, and his father gave it to him without a word, and the boy sat at the kitchen table and went through 4 years of his own pencil handwriting for about an hour. Then he said, "I wrote down every hour for 4 years, and I never once asked him why he paid me in cash." And Emerson Radford, who teaches men to see the exit before they enter the space, who has pulled 11 people out of holes that were trying to keep them, said the truest sentence in this entire story. He said, "You were 13. It was never your job to know. It was mine, and I was on a mountain. There is one more thing, and then I am done with the facts of it." In the spring after the sentencing, the county's volunteer fire department received an anonymous donation, a complete grain entrapment rescue kit, coffer panels, a tripod, a winch, harnesses, a 4-gas monitor, and a lockout kit with 19 padlocks, one for every member, each engraved with a number. Little Harrow VFD has since trained 11 other departments across 4 counties on that equipment. 2 of them have used it. One of them got a man out of a bin in Fayette County in under 30 minutes in 2024, and he went home to his family, and he does not know any of these names and never will. The donation was not anonymous to everybody. Jensen Vanterpool knows exactly where it came from, because the invoice went to a home address, and because there was one thing in the crate that no supplier sells: 19 laminated cards, with 4 rules printed on them, and a line at the bottom that reads, "The first rule is that you do not become the second one in the hole." I told you at the start that I wanted you to count the rules as they broke, and you did, and I want to close on the one I did not read you. In technical rescue, there is a rule that comes before the 4 on the card, and everybody in that trade learns it in the first hour of the first day, and it is uglier than people expect. It is this: you do not become the second casualty. It means that when you arrive and there is a person in a hole and they are alive and they are calling your name, you do not go in. You anchor. You test the air. You lock out the machinery. You put a harness on. You get a second person on the rope. And every one of those steps costs seconds that the person in the hole does not obviously have, and you take them anyway, because the statistics on this are brutal, and they do not care how much you love the person down there. More than half the people who die in these spaces died trying to save somebody else, and almost all of them were somebody's father, and almost all of them made the whole worse. Gannon Ruggles is not, in the end, a story about a cruel man. He is a story about a man who went in without a rope, not into the bin, into the whole thing. He had a $4,000 problem, and he went straight at it with no plan, no check, nobody watching, and he took a child in with him. And the reason his brother-in-law beat him is not that Emerson Radford is tougher, or smarter, or a soldier. It is that when M found himself standing at the edge of a hole with everything he loved down in it, his son, his marriage, his wife's whole family, an entire county, he did the boring thing first. He did not go in. He wrote down the time. He got a second person on the rope. He found out what the machines already knew. So here is what I actually want from you. And it is not keep a record, and it is not trust nobody. It is this: Think of the thing in your life right now that you are about to go into by yourself. The confrontation, the conversation, the debt, the diagnosis, the family thing everybody has agreed not to say out loud. Name the person who is on your rope, out loud, to yourself, right now. If you cannot name one, if the honest answer is, nobody knows I'm going in there, then that is the first thing to fix, before any of the rest of it. Because the hole is not what gets people. Going in alone is what gets people. Somebody should always know you went in.